Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hypersonic 55, and after 3 months away from the cinema, I finally come to you guys with a new film review, and this one comes in the shape of Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. Now, I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I like the first Sherlock Holmes a lot. It happened to have an interesting take on the story of Sherlock Holmes, and Guy Ritchie's direction, along with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law's wonderful performances, gave me a very interesting film to watch when I saw it in the cinema back in 2009. So when I found out there was going to be a sequel to this film, I was proper excited. I've waited a fair amount of time for this film, and one has to ask, was it worth the wait? I think so. I happen to like this film a lot, and in this review I shall tell you why. So the story of this film is an easy one to follow. Basically, we happen to have Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson having to join forces once again to go about and take down their most calculating adversary to date, who happens to be Professor Moriarty. And that's the plot of the film in a very small summarised fashion. The story of this film is very interesting to me, and it was definitely a lot better than the first one in my opinion, because the characters are so much more involved and so much more interesting than the previous film, and to lend themselves to the story in a great way. And there's a great sense of danger and urgency in this film that I thought was lacking in the first one. And while the story tends to get a little complicated than it should do, and some people may get lost in the little ins and outs of the actual story, and while it strays a little too far from the source material for some people's likings, overall the story was fairly impressive. And while I felt that they needed to dive a little deeper into some of the elements that they brought to this story, overall Sherlock Holmes 2 has a great story worth telling. Now, when it comes to characters, Robert Downey Jr. is incredible as Sherlock Holmes, as always. He happens to be funny, complicated, and a very strange man, but he happens to have a brilliant mind, and the way in which he happens to figure things out is nothing short of astounding. Holmes is very similar to how he was in the first film, but I think this film takes him into deeper emotional territory than he was in the first film. And at first, I always thought that Holmes was an invincible smart man that just couldn't be touched. But in this film, we happen to see that he can be hurt, physically and mentally. And we can even see that the great Sherlock Holmes can get things wrong sometimes. And that was something I really liked. Now, when it comes to Dr. Watson, Jude Law is simply wonderful. He is the stern yet fair friend of Sherlock Holmes that happens to bring his own levels of smarts, wit and charm to the film. Even after he gets married and so many changes to his life happen to take place with his new wife, we see that he's the same man as he was in the first film, and he happens to go through some emotional episodes in the film as well that make Watson all the more better for it. And throughout the film we see that Holmes and Watson really need each other, and we see that their bond extends further than just their journeys together, and it's the bond between these two characters that is one of the most powerful aspects of the film. And the other powerful character that happens to complete this little trio of power in terms of characters is Jared Harris as Professor Moriarty. He happens to be the antagonist of this film, and he happens to give one of the most memorable performances in the entire film. As the enemy in this film, he happens to be much more impressive than Mark Strong in the first film, and he happens to have a presence that is undeniably awesome. Moriarty is definitely one of the sort of villains that doesn't act like one on the outside, and happens to operate from the shadows, while having a different persona to the public as a cover. And as nice and charming as he is as a character, he is a villain, and when his calculating side happens to come out and he shows you how cruel he is, he's definitely a force to be dealt with, and he's definitely not one of those sort of guys you'd want to meet in a back alley at night. And one of the other cool things about Moriarty is the way in which he interacts with Holmes. They are both incredibly smart people trying to outwit each other over and over again, and we see them come face to face and even have a casual conversation like they were best friends, which was just incredible. And the rest of the cast happen to do really well in their roles as well. Noomi Rapace, at least I hope I'm saying her last name right, was really interesting as Zimza, though I wish her character was used a lot more in this film. I thought she was going to be a much more integral part to the film, but unfortunately she was incredibly underused in this film, and that really saddened me greatly. But what she did contribute to the film was fairly good, and the same can be said for Rachel McAdams and Kelly Riley as well, who reprised their roles as Irene Adler and Mary Mortson / Mary Watson, because obviously she got married in this film. But one of these special mentions has to go to Stephen Fry, who is just amazing as Mycroft Holmes. He is just wonderful in this film. He is witty, funny, and just larger than life. And in all the scenes that he happened to be in, he happened to be very memorable. He was just lovely, and he was just wow. Stephen Fry was just awesome. When he happens to be in a film, he delivers on so many levels. Now, when it comes to the action sequences in this film does not disappoint. From the fights to the chase sequences and everything in between, there is so much going on, it is just unnatural. There is a much higher level of action than there was before, and everything is on such a big scale from the first film that it's just really interesting to look at. The cinematography is fantastic. There are some really interesting tracking shots and camera shots from like some of the scenes in the woods to the different locations that they happen to go through in Europe and all that. It is just a wonderful, wonderful thing to look at. There are so many interesting choreographed fights that Holmes happened to get into. There are some interesting firefights and gunfights. It's just wow. And there is so much more thrills and tension and adventure in this film than there was before. It was just wonderful. And as always, Hans Zimmer is just spot on as the composer of the soundtrack in this film. It is just as amazing as it was in the first film. Probably a little better actually, because there was so much more diversity to it than the first one. But as usual, Hans Zimmer, he's just perfect, yeah. So overall, Sherlock Holmes A Game of Shadows is a great follow-up to the first film. In a lot of ways, it's a lot better than its predecessor, with a lot better pacing and balancing, a much deeper plot, great character development, a better villain, and incredible action sequences that is definitely worth checking out. A lot of film critics have given this film a lot of flack, and to be honest, I don't know why. Sure, the film didn't deviate that much from its original, and some may say, like, you know, it just went a little extra for its own good. But overall, I think this film is still worth a watch. If you like the first Sherlock Holmes film, then you're definitely going to like this one as well. And I highly recommend this film. Just go and watch it. I think you'll be fairly impressed. So overall, I'm going to give this film an 8 out of 10, and I liked it a lot. So yeah, that's been my review, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you enjoyed this one and look forward to the next set when they happen to show up. So until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55, signing out.